All right, everybody. Today we have a different kind of episode. I actually don't know how long this one will take, but I kind of want to make this one a little bit quicker because I want to make in depth videos kind of explaining everything in more detail as opposed to one super duper long episode that, let's be honest, you guys might not digest. If it's in smaller packages, it might be easier to digest and, should be something that you guys can look into because I don't want this channel or just even my TikTok to just remain manifestation content because honestly it's just too stagnant in the sense where there is so much more to manifestation than just manifesting. There is everything else behind this. And I'm going to kind of talk about that in today's episode, right? So I don't really know how long it's going to take. And actually, because I know it's going to be such a jam-packed video and there's going to be so much to talk about, I actually, on my second monitor that's right here that you can't see, I actually put a list, surprisingly, because I never put lists on things. I hate organizing shit and just take a look at my room. There's shit's all over the place. Even the way I record my shit, it is everywhere, right? But I think for today's case, I definitely did need to kind of list things out. So, what today's episode is going to be about is how manifestation is just a small piece of a larger truth in this world. And I'm going to use truth in a broader sense because I haven't yet fully figured out what this means, right? This is something that I've recently kind of started to dive into. And so, you know, the more I continue to learn about my reality and just how it works, and I continue to develop my worldview and everything beyond just manifesting and how manifestation plays a small role into a much larger thing. I can give you guys more information, and ultimately, I want to be able to write a book about this and document everything as I go. So, I can teach this to other people outside of just videos and all that because some people just like to read, right? Especially if you're into philosophy, you're going to probably you'd rather read and then make up your interpretations than just me telling you a video, right? So, first, I want to get this started by something that I kind of, wasn't expecting, but it definitely helped me in the longer run, and I think it's going to continue to help me in the longer run. So, today my college started back up. Spring semester started again, and last semester when I was scheduling classes, one of my counselors, recommended that I take a philosophy class because it's going to be a very easy class, and most people just take it as an elective, and she thought I should do the same. And at the time, I was like, maybe I don't really need a philosophy class, only because, well, I already have a pretty set worldview, and I feel like just listening to other perspectives might, it's just not needed because mine is the right one. And so at the time, I thought that was the right thought process, but looking back at it now, that was kind of naive because if you do have a worldview that you're so deeply believing in, you'd want to hear other perspectives, right? Only to further your own worldview, because ultimately you should be challenging your own thoughts and beliefs so that you can continue to further educate yourself on your own beliefs. And this is something that everybody should be doing, right? Especially if you've got something like a worldview that you're so heavily invested in, like I do. So, in today's class, we talked about Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy, right? Vaguely, mostly we were talking about Western philosophers, which I won't really get into the details of because that's not what you guys are here for. But one thing in specific that we talked about was in Eastern philosophy, we tend to see detachment from ego in different ways than we do Western, right? So in Eastern philosophy, we tend to detach from ego through meditation, right? You meditate, you observe, and then as you're observing and meditating over time, you learn to detach from your ego and worldly attachments and all that good stuff. Whereas in Western philosophy, wait, let me make sure I'm getting this right really quickly. I don't want to be lying to you guys out of my ass. Yeah, so sorry. So I'm pretty sure that's what I said. Eastern philosophy, meditation, and then Western philosophy comes through a lot of, what is the word, reflection and contemplation, in the sense where we, you know, as human beings should be contemplating the meaning of life and reflecting a little bit deeper on the aspects of our life that we, tend to take as beliefs. And so we see like philosophers like Aristotle and, those guys, they definitely preach this belief of self-reflection. And something my professor mentioned that like really clicked with me, I was like, oh, wait a second, I already do this. And he was saying the best way to move throughout your life is to have a mixture of both, right? And he was saying, he was making a joke on how, ideally he should be doing that, where he always tells himself he's going to get back to his house from campus, and then he's gonna go meditate for a bit, and but he never ends up doing that and ends up taking naps. So he made a little joke about it, but as he was saying that, it really clicked to me like, wow, that is seriously, that's already something I do, and doing that was how I was able to learn to observe my ego and be able to separate from it to some degree. And so, I think that this is something that everybody should start to do, because although meditation, yes, is good in itself, right? It's not nothing bad. In fact, you can gain a lot from just meditating or self-reflection, but doing both gives you like a completely different perspective that just doing one couldn't give you, right? And so, you know, y- we meditate to detach, but then Western philosophy will have us think, okay, well, why am I detaching? For what reasons, right? And so, as opposed to just doing one thing specifically for one reason, do both, so you can actually have a larger sense of the world view, and be able to tackle your own beliefs, and then be able to teach other people about your beliefs in a way that's nicely packaged. Where you can be able to teach your beliefs to anyone and not feel threatened, or not be stumbling over your own words to some degree, and you're actually being able to fully immerse yourself in the conversation of spreading your beliefs. If you talk to somebody and they might not exactly believe whatever it is that you're saying, you should be able to back up your own causes, give them a reasonable explanation as to why you believe whatever it is that you believe. And so I thought that that was a really, really great topic to talk about. And I think it's something that everybody should do for themselves, right? Like doing both simultaneously, something I already teach you guys to do, will ultimately help you in the longer run of your entirety of your life, understanding why things are the way they are, why they happened the way they did. But beyond that, being able to separate yourself from your ego to some degree. And as I've learned recently, which I will get to, like literally in the next point, you know, might as well transition into that. The ego was never intentionally supposed to be something that was meant to harm us, right? And I haven't fully flushed out why I've come to this decision just yet. But something exact, I don't know what, but something's pushing me deeper to this subject, right? My intuition is guiding me, excuse me, closer to this subject, and I'm going to further research that and, look into some other philosophers, look at their views, and then come up with my own belief. But from what I can tell you right now, my belief is that ego originally was meant to guide us throughout this mortal experience back to divinity, right? As we are all one, we are all God. God created this reality, this world, right, to experience itself through humanity, through animals, through every living being on this planet. And as we are humans, humans are the only people with an ego. Only, well, I shouldn't even just say only people, we're the only sentient life form with ego. And, something else I want to ponder is, why is that? Why are we the only ones that have an ego? And although I don't have an answer to you for that yet, what I can tell you in specific is that we have an ego because it creates individuality, right? Individuality is not a bad thing. And so we look at animals, right? Animals do not have an ego. There is no need for animals to have an ego because they are already the closest to God as they are. They're living their lives naturally, taking the natural actions exactly as they would be anyway. They don't need an ego, nor do they need consciousness to exist. They're solely existing for their own purpose and doing it perfectly, right? They're not pondering if whether murder is a good or bad thing. They do it because it is their existence. That's how they survive. And so, you know, uh, the topic of why animals kill each other, that can be its own entire discussion, but that's not important. Essentially, what I'm getting is that for some reason, us humans have an ego, and my belief is that it is for God to exist through us as us, right? To experience life. But without an ego, we would just be like other animals. No sense of personality, no sense of individuality. Now, can you bring up the idea that, as animals are also evolving, could they have consciousness? I can't tell you for sure, but maybe, right? Like, again, there could be a point in time, and again, time doesn't even exist, but there could be a time in a so called future where animals too have an ego, right? That could be a possibility. I don't even know how that would come to be. And again, that's not really the topic of the video, but ultimately we have an ego so that the universe, God, source, can experience us through individuality, through different experiences that create different scenarios and, ultimately a new experience that God can exist through, right? So this is why we have an ego. Originally, it is to guide us ultimately back to divinity, right? The whole purpose is this ego creates individuality, and as we're moving throughout our lives, the sole purpose of the ego is to naturally push us closer to divinity again, right? A reminder of our own divinity, bringing us back to source, but bringing yourself back to source as a complete and sole identity, as something that is inherently different from everyone else, from every other identity, right? So that is to experience God through a different lens, but infinitely different lenses, as there are so many humans on this earth. Everyone will experience God differently. And so it is my belief that ego was originally meant to guide us through the mortal experience back to godhood, which is why we're even seeing things like manifestation in the first place, right? So taking that into consideration, I believe also that as society developed, right, as people started to kind of grow more intelligent and understand their divinity more and more, right, this created new beliefs. We take a look around all throughout history. You look at Greek mythology, right? They believed they had gods for everything, right? Even same thing with Hindu, right? Hindu religion has gods for so many different things, right? And so as we create these new beliefs, the ego started to create new beliefs, and then a lot of people started to buy into certain beliefs. Even at this point, I wouldn't even say that divinity was completely like gone from people's lives. It was a very prevalent thing, especially in this era before Christ. Divinity and faith was your life, right? Obviously, there was logic as well, but faith played a much larger role in people's lives then than it did now. And I think it's important to kind of look at that and be like, we look at times then, and although there were wars and such, this is humanity, of course. Animals, we are animals, and we are territorial and vicious by nature and all these things. So yes, of course there will be war. There will always be war and such. But back then there was still this large emphasis on faith. And so as beliefs started to kind of exist further, as these newer beliefs were starting to be made, this kind of shifted people's perspectives back, not back, but kind of into a new way of life that we're still living in now, where there's this fight or flight which we're all living through, right? We're living through this life far more logically than we're ever supposed to, right? And so this caused a huge separation from divinity, where divinity for a lot of people ends up being a afterthought or a subtle back, something that's like, we believe it, but it's not a prevalent part of our lives. We can even look at that now, right? Most people will go about their days and doing their work as they do, handling the problems, whatever that might be, thrown at them, and they do it every day. And then maybe once a week, sorry, you'll go to like a church or something, and you'll fucking do whatever. And I'm just using Christianity as an example, but this goes for pretty much anything. Like, the idea is that we go most of our life just living in this ego-based world through an ego lens as an ego, and we don't necessarily spend enough time nurturing our bond with divinity, and this causes us to perpetuate this cycle of separation from God. And so, if we look over a larger span, right, from we look at things from today, modern day experience, right, what is the effect of ego? This over reliance on ego, what does that look like to us now? And so I look at this and I'm thinking to myself, like, there is so much chaos in this world, right? Everything is to its most extreme state right now. You look at things politically, politics is super duper, like, is the greatest way of looking at what an ego based life is like. Modern day politics is super extremist, right? If you're on the right, you're extreme right. If you're left, you're on the extreme left. And if you are not on the extreme side of either, then people will perceive you as the enemy. Goes back to show you that we're still in this fight or flight belief, this fight or flight experience that, you know, uh, is sadly the life that we've come to accept as our own in recent times. And you look everywhere. You look even in a smaller scale within, just your local community. I'm sure there's massive disagreements on what should be done, even in your local states or your own neighborhoods or friendships, whatever it might be. Like, disagreements will always be there, but now it's come to a place where it's vicious. We look at ICE, for example, in America. Over here, what happened with ICE, right? This is so extreme, but it all goes down to beliefs. Should people be killed for their beliefs? Again, all of this stems from this fight or flight ego response, and we've lost our link to divinity a little bit, or it's almost dissipated from us to some degree. Um, and so, what can we do about this, right? Although it's not possible to get rid of our ego, right? Because ego is what is keeping us in this world, right? In this 3D world. And a loss of that would either mean death or also, we hear about things like ego death, and that's just a complete loss of identity. So ultimately, you're experiencing a nothing burger life, right? And if that's the life you want to live, you can go ahead and do that. But ultimately, I believe we're in this world to experience pleasures and joys. There's and I'll talk about this a little later, this is why when I was Buddhist, started to reflect on that. Ultimately, I rejected Buddhism because I believe that we're in this world not to completely detach from what makes us human, but we're here to be human in the first place, to experience these pleasures and joys that this life can bring us. But I'll get to that in a bit. But we can't get rid of the ego, right? But what we also have to understand is that an over reliance on ego causes chaos, and we're already seeing that now, right? Huge radical shifts in people's perspective into the most extremist ways, down to their personalities, right? And so, we have to find this middle ground of ultimately what I'm getting at is we have to build this middle ground of faith and logic, because both are necessary to live in this world, but also they play their own parts in different things. So, you know, it's ultimately learning how we can strike a balance between the two. That's the ultimate question. And I believe the answer to this question will be what frees society from this chaotic cycle we're in, this vicious, violent nature of the world we're in can ultimately be, solved if we just, not to all be under one faith, because I believe that religion is not the way to fix anything, but rather acceptance of belief in itself, that nothing is the concrete answer. No religion is concrete, is the perfect and the only one, but rather everything is just interpretation of what we experience as divinity, and being okay with that, accepting that, is what will free us from that, right? Look, pretty much every single war you're seeing is always tied back to religion. Everything goes back to religion, and this is why I believe that modern day religion is harming us more so than helping us. We see Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, these religions, sadly, they have the right message. And again, every belief, even Hinduism, Buddhists, and Christianity, everything, they all come down to this one, similar beliefs, right? Everything you hear, they all are similar in nature, albeit the story's told differently. Um, they're all similar to some degree. So this isn't to say one is right, one is wrong, but ultimately, you know, uh, it's when we weaponize these things. If you're not with us, you're against us, and if you're against us, you do not deserve to live, or you are sinning. That is what causes the suffering. And so, just acceptance that yes, people can believe whatever they want to believe is the way to heal this world, and obviously that is easily said than done. But again, going back to manifestation, we don't need to figure out how that's going to work. Us trying to effort towards that world will only make it harder. So trust the forces that may be, and excuse me, everything will unfold to that end. And so, I think it's important that we understand that. Religion definitely does play a big role as to how much separation we have in this world. Religion in itself isn't wrong, but how we go about religion as the end all be all is definitely wrong. People can believe whatever you want to believe, but understand those beliefs are going to outwardly reflect, right? They're going to outwardly reflect. And again, that's what manifestation is. And so this disagreement, disconnect in belief, and not just belief, disconnect in acceptance is what causes this chaos and violence that we're seeing in this world. You know, and ultimately, like this kind of goes back to even me, right? Like, I'll tell you a little bit of my story. I grew up Hindu, but as long as I could remember, I believe even when I was like 5 or 6 years old, I always rejected the idea of gods. I never understood why they were better than me, and I would ask my parents, and they would never have like a straightforward answer for me that I liked. And so whenever we would pray, in my head, I'm like, I'm just as, I'm just as as powerful as you are, right? And so I always rejected it. I was very outward of my rejection towards being Hindu. And, as I was in my younger days, I would reject God. I would be very angry at God for making life the way it was. And ultimately, that led me to Buddhism. And so I really enjoyed Buddhism, and I also enjoyed the idea of Stoicism. And so for some period in my life, I was very much in this like attachment is suffering, and I was living pretty well, not being so attached to people and all these other things in my life, and just happy with what I had until you fall in love, and obviously love is an experience that every human has, and Buddhism will teach you that you have to detach from the worldly desires. But I didn't want to detach from love because love is naturally within us. And so as I would do this, I started to question my own beliefs in Buddhism. And ultimately, I was still Buddhist up until like even last year, maybe not even really. I would tell people I'm Buddhist, but not really. But up until last year, when I was really questioning my beliefs, I was like, hey, I don't really believe that this is true. If this world has joy in it, if there is pleasure in this world, then we should be able to accept it, but in a way that doesn't cause suffering. And I didn't know how that would make sense at the time, but I didn't really think about it, until recently. And so ultimately, I started to reject Buddhist beliefs, because hey, this world was meant for to enjoy. So why in the world would I not enjoy it, right? Again, if attachment is suffering, then why are we here in the first place? Why were we put on this earth if it wasn't to enjoy? And so I can go on as to the other things I questioned. I questioned the idea of karma. Karma didn't really fully make sense to me, and I don't believe in karma even now, or the layers of hell, and all these things that Buddhism talks about. And ultimately, if you look into the history of Buddhism, even up until before Buddha himself died, a lot of his teachings almost kind of slightly reverted even back to Hinduism, right? All the things he rejected, he to some degree started to accept again, like in terms of cycle of reincarnation and karma and all these other pieces of Hindu belief that he did end up tying back to his own religion. So it was kind of contradictory to some degree that yeah, it didn't make sense to me. So ultimately, I did already kind of talk about this, but I believe that all religions and belief systems do ultimately lead to oneness in some way. And, you know, we look back at, if you look at the text for all these religions, they're all kind of saying the same thing. They all allude to similar beliefs. And, you know, why is that? I believe there is one true, I believe there's an answer to that, right? I can't tell you that right now. I can't tell you that yet. But I believe that ultimately there will be an answer that I come up with that satisfies me because that truth is already within me. It already exists and it's already making its way to me as I continue, as even as I make this video, right? That truth will find its way to me. And so everything leads back to oneness, that we are all one. God is not separate from us. Source is not separate from us. Even the word God is an ego-based construct. It doesn't even exist. It's not even a real thing. That power is already within us, but we called it God and then we separated it from us. And so that was the original issue. That was what caused all of this suffering in the first place, right? If you look at Greek mythology, they would look at rain and thunder and think that it was the gods being angry at them, right? And so we look at that and, you know, we're already creating separation from divinity because we're already placing these gods far above us, that everything we do is wrong and that there needs to be some sort of fix to it. And then when we fix it, then maybe God will be happy and they will bless us. When that was never the case. That was never how divinity was ever supposed to be, right? If divinity is one with us, then why should we ever have to seek it out? Why go through the troubles of suffering in order to seek that truth when there's nothing to really seek out in the first place, you know? And, you know, I want to kind of end this short video. Again, I'm not going to make this a super long video because I'm going to go into greater depth into each of the topics I just spoke about in their own perspective videos. So everything I'm talking about in this like little 30-minute, 40-minute video is just a kind of early look into what I'm developing, right? Ultimately, my intention, and I'm not even setting, I'm just declaring this right now. So let this be something you hold me against, right? My intention is to help free this world from the illusion that most of us, not most as in us, but like regular people, just the society as a whole is stuck in, right? The illusion of separation that most people in this world are stuck and lost in. I want to lift that from the people, which is why the account of my name, the name of my account is Lifted Veil. I want to lift the veil off these people, off as many people as I can. Ultimately, I want to help people find the divinity that's already within them, right? Seek the answer that fulfills them, because everybody's answer is going to be different. And this goes beyond even manifestation. This is why I said manifestation is just, you know, these desires, they're nothing if you think about it, right? Yes, we want these things, but ultimately what having these desires says about us is that we have the stable foundation to have a belief, right? That's why we get things in the first place. That's why shit materializes in the first place. It isn't just to have them. Yeah, we can have them, enjoy them, but it's to understand that getting these things and believing, acknowledging and knowing in God, in divinity that's already within you, is the strongest foundation you have. So that as you move throughout your individual experience, yes, you can have the pleasure, but ultimately it will lead you back to the divinity that is within you already. And that divinity that's already within you will find its answer, and it might be different for everyone, right? How that divinity reaches them and what conclusions they come about might be different for everybody. But the truth remains that God is all loving, in the sense where God is neutral with everything and everyone. The beliefs that we place onto things are true because we are placing that belief as God onto it. That definitions are neutral. Everything is neutral and nothing is concrete. Everything is malleable. So that will remain constant. But your individual answer for divinity could be different from someone else's. And I think that is the ultimate goal of living this mortal life. It is to seek out divinity without being attached to it and letting it naturally find you and giving consciousness a different perspective, right? Albeit Consciousness is already infinite. It already knows everything. It already has the answer to everything. But it's experiencing itself through us, experiencing its own interpretations, its own answers through us. There is no wrong belief. There is no wrong belief about what divinity is, right? So what I'm telling you, what I'm preaching right now is its own interpretation, is my interpretation, my truth, and what is real for me, right? How I'm teaching you my viewpoints and what manifestation is real, and it is true to me. And it might be true for you. If you go and you are also on this path of self-searching and finding the divinity within you, you might come up with the same answers as I do. And even if you don't, you can believe what I'm telling you, and therefore you will be a believer of what I'm telling you. That in itself is the answer to the divinity that's already within you, right? So not only are you experiencing the joys and pleasures of life, but you've also found the answer to what divinity is to you. And understanding that divinity is not a single construct, that there's infinite possibilities of what divinity is, and not one of them is wrong, is what everyone in this world needs to understand. And when we understand that and acknowledge that as belief, as truth, that is when we are free from the illusion of what the world is, right? And that is how we would be able to stop so much suffering in this world, is self-acceptance and acceptance that divinity appears differently for everybody. So yes, religion, right? Christianity, Judaism, agnostic, Islam, all of these things are true and real, just as real as any belief I'm telling you or any belief you have for yourself. But it might not be your specific belief, but it is a belief that is true for those who seeked out belief and they ended up with this as their truth, right? And so this is what we need to do, is learn to accept your truth as how you want to, but accept the world for what it is too. As when we don't accept the world as perfect, when we don't see everything as perfect, then we create suffering because that person doesn't believe what I believe and they need to believe what I believe because I'm the right one. No, you're both right, right? Both of your beliefs are right, whether you see them as wrong or right. They're both right because good and bad, wrong and right doesn't exist to begin with. All human ego-based constructs. That's it. Right? And again, I'm going to make a longer video, shorter videos, or incrementally talking about everything I just talked about now. But I wanted to make this video to kind of be a precursor to everything I'm going to do and what will be written and for you guys to look forward to. So that's pretty much all I have for you right now. But it is definitely something that I think you guys should definitely look forward to. And I will catch you guys later and look forward to it.